Dean Obeidallah. He wants to be your Muslim friend.
Most Muslims, I know many, are great people.
Watch this.
People.
You're listening to the Dean Obeidallah Show, where comedy meets politics and all things in between.
And welcome back, Dean Obeidallah Show. We're live here Wednesday, January 8th. Here in studio, Julian Zelizer, CNN contributor, professor at Princeton University, author of various books. Let me ask you, is it, if you're going to do an analogy in a way, is last night similar to the missiles in October with JFK and the ship going up the blockade and then pulling back the Russian ship? And instead, you have these missiles where, and the whole thing is the Russians, the Soviets at the time, had to save face somehow. I don't remember how they did it. But in this case, the Iranians had to save face in all this. They did missiles that they knew were not going to hurt anyone because at least the Americans and the Iraqis, everyone had enough time. You think that's similar? Is that fair or not?
There's a little, there's something of a comparison where you have a tense standoff. The capacity of Iran is not what the capacity of the Soviet Union is. So we were talking a total worldwide nuclear war in 1962, whereas we don't know exactly what was going to unfold. But there is a face-saving similarity. It was different here. That's interesting. The Cuban Missile Crisis, everyone was watching. It consumed the nation. Whereas this, we're in an age where probably some people were watching that. Some people were watching, some show on home TV. And so it doesn't command the same attention as in 62.
So let me play, Donald Trump lied a lot in his speech today, and I'm actually proposing that in the future, fact checkers only tell us what's true. Just assume everything's a lie in every speech. He told two truths today. But there are many lies. One is that Soleimani killed thousands of Americans. That's not true. No one has said that. It's been around 600. But what I found despicable was his attack on the Obama administration. I want to play, it's actually cut together, but folks, it's completely in context, I can assure you. I just cut out the rambling in between. And here is clip number 4, please, Nina.
Iran's hostilities substantially increased after the foolish Iran nuclear deal was signed in 2013. And they were given $150 billion, not to mention $1.8 billion in cash. The missiles fired last night at us and our allies were paid for with the funds made available by the last administration.
The last line, and by the way, we fact-checked earlier in the show when we had Congressman Bonnie Watson-Coleman on, we did not give $150 million. We unfroze money. The number is more along the lines around $56 billion that we unfroze. It's been fact-checked, political fact. It's not $150 billion. Trump will just keep lying. It doesn't matter. But what I found really vile was him saying the missiles fired last night at our allies were paid for with the funds made available by the Obama administration. Why the pettiness? In history, have we had presidents blame their predecessor in this kind of fashion like this?
No, not like this. This is very specific. It's very duplicitous in terms of what he's saying. And it's really lowball politics. He is someone, as president, who's been very obsessed with Obama. In terms of policy, he's been obsessed from day one with ripping apart the Iran agreement and then undermining it. But even more, he doesn't want to look like Obama to his supporters. And I think as much as this all might be a distraction from impeachment, it's also about him trying to look tough. And we've heard he didn't like the coverage after the embassy attack, that it would be like Benghazi. Right. And this is something that kind of takes up a lot of his brain space on many issues. So it's not a total surprise he'd kind of sneak Obama into the discussion today.
There was no need for that. Was stunning.
No need
and I
for
watched
it.
Susan Rice on MSNBC afterwards, and she was livid. She was, you could just see it. And she had to contain herself, how angry she was at that. She should be. This is the leader of the country, who's the president, as much as I despise that he is. And to take a shot at your predecessor in a moment where you have the stage of the world, literally the world stage there. Yeah. And you could, everything else in the speech, there were some lies, we would have fact checked it, but that was just such a partisan hack move. Now, I find it interesting that a new poll today, just one poll, but a Reuters poll, asked Americans, do you approve of Trump's recent escalation against Iran? Only 37% approve, 54% don't approve. And I was pointing out to you the Daley Rasmussen poll, which oversamples Republicans. It's the one Trump loves. He has gone down now. He's underwater by 7 points now. At the time of the assassination, of Soleimani, he was dead even 50-50. So it's not been helpful to him at all. This has not been helpful.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see what happens. I could imagine those going up as the politics shift back. But there were a few people who were very eager to all of a sudden be in a war with Iran, and certainly within his own realm of support to have, children going to fight, people's children going to fight for this. And I think there was enough of a scare here, in a sense. It was unclear why this was even happening, that even some very red Republicans, from Tucker Carlson to supporters in the electorate, weren't happy with this. And remember, he ran against George W. Bush in some ways, and he made this whole promise that he would not get in a war of choice that was unnecessary, and people like that. So it's not a surprise when he does the same thing, they say no.
And Tucker Carlson, and I told you, I don't think I said this on air, I was speaking to you right before, there was news tonight that Tucker Carlson's ratings during their Iran coverage were the highest they've, I think, ever been. I mean, he is neck and neck with Sean Hannity now, and he was just slamming the intelligence community. He was slamming Pompeo by face. He was slamming the idea, Mike Pence saying that 9/11 and the Soleimani was involved in that. And he was making this poignant point I played earlier. Let's play clip number 6. It's a short clip from Tucker Carlson on why Washington likes war. And he's attacking Trump. This is about Trump, but not saying Trump's name. 6, please.
If you were at an airport over the weekend, you may have seen American troops on the move, leaving their families on their way to the Middle East. Now, just a month ago, not 1 in 100 Americans was thinking about Iran. Now, suddenly, we are on the brink of war. In Washington, that is considered an upgrade, indeed a massive improvement. It's harder to get rich and powerful in Washington during peacetime, so our leaders have a built-in bias for war.
It sounds like such a true progressive, like Noam Chomsky could be saying this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And it's Tucker Carlson. This
Right.
is stunning. This
It won't
bizarre...
last beyond this.
Well, this is the only thing.
Yes.
Well, you know what? I played a clip the other night of him slamming this and about we have problems in America. Embedded in that was white nationalism. Because he goes, and none of these Republicans will talk about the invasion from the southern border. I'm like, oh, there you go. I cut that part out when I played it on the show. So deep down, it is an uber nationalism, which means don't get involved in this. Don't let brown people in. Don't do anything. Let's stay with the homeland. And
that's not totally new. I mean, there's a long history of kind of right-wing nationalism and progressive anti-war activism, sometimes finding common ground for very different reasons.
Right.
And so I think you're seeing a little bit of that today. The other thing, there's no tangible return for what he did. Obviously, he is dead. But if you think back to the Cuban Missile Crisis, the missiles are removed. This is what the U.S. wants. They get what they want. Here, Iran's still in place. The government's still in place. The threat still remains. So it's harder to make this case. Great things have been achieved.
In fact, the ultimate thing might be U.S. troops removed from Iraq. I mean, that's the odd thing in all of this, because Trump will now declare victory and go, we're taking the troops out. I saw a Republican congressman today defending Trump all the way on the line, and it was Poppy Harlow saying to him, so what should we do next? And he said, we should take our troops out of Iraq. And she goes, well, isn't that what Iran wants? He goes, we have to get out of there. And that is exactly what Iran wants, to increase their influence in Iraq. So we're going to find out how this plays out, but it's interesting to see how certain issues transcend simple left-right.
Yes, and it could solidify Iran's power. That's the ultimate part, not just with Iraq. They now gained a rallying cry against the president, against the U.S., where they didn't have that. They were an isolated force in many ways in the region. And so this is one of those actions where it's not simply was it necessary, but does it actually undermine exactly what the U.S. was trying to do?
Earlier in the show, I had Congressman Ruben Gallego on, who served in Iraq, and he's a Marine. And he was making the point that, first of all, they've shown nothing in the briefing. He's on House Armed Services. He goes, I get classified briefings. He said, I got one a few months ago. The new briefing we got, nothing different. There's no imminent threat. And he said, even if there was, there's a question of killing him. Would it stop anything? He goes, this is not a guy who runs a terror cell. This is the guy's effectively the second ranking guy in a military of 500,000 people in a nation of 80 million.
Yeah.
So killing him, it's not about, on the right, and I'm glad it didn't really get the traction. And because people like Tucker were undermining it, the idea that, we're being pro-terrorist or we're defending this guy. We're not. We're saying if you're going to kill effectively the second ranking guy in a nation state, there better be something really compelling, because we all understand you're unleashing something very bad.
Yes.
And I mean, I got to play Mike Lee today, senior senator from Utah, and really inflamed. Clip number 7, Nina. Let's play that.
I find this insulting and demeaning, not personally, but to the office that each of the 100 senators in this building happens to hold. I find it insulting and I find it demeaning to the Constitution of the United States, to which we've all sworn an oath. It is, after all, the prerogative of the legislative branch to declare war. Article 1, Section 8 makes that very clear. Alexander Hamilton in Federalist Number 69 made clear that this was a sharp contrast from the form of government that we had prior to the Revolution, a form of government in which the executive, the king, had the power to take us to war. He did not need the Parliament to weigh in on it, to support it. That was the Parliament's job after the fact, after we had gone into war. This, Hamilton explained in Federalist 69, is exactly the reason why this power was put in Article 1, Section 8, in the branch of government most accountable to the people at the most regular intervals.
I have never learned more details of our Constitution than because of Donald Trump. But they have a Republican make this, what Mike Lee is saying is 100% correct. This is not Democrat nor Republican. This is the Constitution. This is Alexander Hamilton. Our framers fought a revolution against the king, and we're not going to create a document to allow a new king to organically come into power. This was a check on it.
It's true, though, since Korea in 1950, Congress has not declared war, and Congress has allowed presidents to send troops all over the place. We tried to restrain it in 1973 with the War Powers Act. Hasn't really worked so well. So Lee is totally accurate, but this is not just a Trump problem. Trump, once again, is exploiting presidential power that has been accumulated over the decades in just a very aggressive fashion.
And Congressman Gallego made a blunt point, because maybe we let Obama go further than we should have in Congress. And that was very interesting for a Democratic member of Congress to say. I was like,
yeah.
And I actually appreciate it. I think in this time, this is not left nor right. This is about what you want for the presidency and in our nation. And I said, do you think if a Democratic president gets elected that you will propose legislation to curtail them? And he said, yes. And I said, but do you think they'll sign it? Because every president gets in there and wants to have as much power as possible, not restrain their power.
And they find loopholes. So what they've done historically is they'll send troops, and you have this 30-day window. But then Congress isn't going to cut the funding for troops that are already there. That doesn't look very good. So if they're going to really push for legislation, they need to rethink, how do you restrain a president, make sure the buy-in is earlier. Part of it is legislators demanding that information up front and being really, putting pressure on the president. They just don't do that. They don't do that.
What a great point, too, about the real-world impact. So, I mean, the War Powers Act says 60 days. If they don't get authorization, they have to withdraw the troops. The only power Congress really has to do that is to withhold funding. Are you not going to fund our troops in the theater of war? Good luck with that vote.
Exactly. Never is going to happen. So you need a different mechanism. I don't know what that is, but it was a flaw from the time that legislation was put into place.
Well, they just had on the screen a few minutes ago, Thursday, Speaker Pelosi is going to have a vote on a War Powers resolution. I don't know what it's going to say. We'll, of course, cover it. I did remind people, tomorrow's Thursday, today's Wednesday, that we covered it earlier, and I had Ro Khanna on around the time, and Mark Pocan, a congressman from Wisconsin, was instrumental in a resolution, bipartisan, that passed in April, saying under the War Powers Resolution, no more funding for the troops in Yemen, or us supporting the Saudi effort in Yemen against the Iran proxies there, the Houthis. It passes bipartisan. Trump vetoes it, not enough to override it, dead. It just continues on.
Yeah.
I don't know why there's not institutional loyalty among Republicans to go, I'm going to go back and tell my base, institutionally, we can't allow a president to be a king.
Well, that's true, but Republicans gave up on that argument a long time ago, and many Democrats have as well. So this is a problem. As you're saying, it's not just a partisan problem. It's an institutional problem, certainly on national security, not on all other issues. But here, Congress, if they want, they can still be assertive. Look, in 2006, part of the reason at least Bush considers reversing policy in Iraq and moves toward a surge is because Democrats took over and they were putting pressure. I think ultimately, for anything to change right now, you're going to need Republican buy-in. That's the only pressure you can put on the president.
Well, you wrote an article that I thought was really interesting for CNN about how Democrats should respond to this and what, because we're in the middle of a 2020 election. And do you think this should change the focus of the candidates, which really so far has not been about foreign policy in any kind of detail? What's your recommendation to the candidates?
I mean, I wrote in the piece, not at all. And that, of course, they're going to talk about Iran. They might talk a little bit more, but the basic issues are still domestic issues in terms of policy. I don't think voters are going to switch so dramatically from concerns about health care and security to what's happening in Iran. This could be fleeting, as we're seeing. I mean, we see how these stories move quickly, especially in this day and age. And finally, the fundamental critique of how Trump handled Iran is the same argument that Democrats have been making on everything at this point. It's about how he conducts himself, how he controls and uses presidential power. And I think that's the theme. It's not Iran. It's not this policy. It's a bigger question of, can he be trusted with this power anymore?
Do you think on some level he's raised the question of fitness to be commander-in-chief that was not there before? I mean, it was there, but now we have a real world, because you could say this guy might take us to the edge of war with a superpower, a regional power. And you're like, come on, he keeps saying he doesn't want wars. Well, we were at the precipice. We were on the edge of war last night. And
I think so, but then remember Rocket Man tweets. And we've had moments like this even with foreign policy where that question of fitness was front and center and it goes away. So I agree. I mean, this is the most frightening of the moments for most Americans, but I'm not sure it really will transform the landscape that way.
By the way, Tulsi Gabbard is on Fox News now trying to win the Democratic nomination for president. She's over your shoulder on Tucker Carlson's show, because that's where you go when you try to win the Democratic nomination. Just like if I was a Republican, I would go on MS and NPR all the time. So you had an interesting point in your article that Desert Storm, big issue, 1991, George Herbert Walker Bush riding the wave, and Bill Clinton comes in focused on the economy. And I looked at the actual poll numbers. Do you know George Herbert Walker Bush, his approval ratings?
90% or something like that.
Almost 90% in the fall before the election year. By this exact day in his presidency, he had fallen from nearly 90% to 44% as the economy began to erode. I can't believe he lost 40 points in a matter of, that's like 10 points a month. This is off the chart stuff.
A lot of Democrats didn't even want to run. That's part of why Clinton won the nomination. They figured he was going to be impossible to beat. But it changed quickly. And it wasn't simply that people became critical of Desert Storm. It was people moved on to the recession. And my sense is you'll have the same dynamic, assuming there's no real military fallout right now. That's going to happen even faster. Back then, we didn't have the same cable news and internet and social media where things move minute to minute. So how is this going to sustain interest, through November of 2020? It seems hard to believe.
Unless, of course, Iran looks at our polling and looks at everything and wants to get Trump out and does something, not interfere in the election like Russia did, but do some act to make it a bigger issue again and make Americans go like, wow, this Trump guy, I don't want 4 more years of this. Who knows what he does after this? And, I kept saying today and on social media, and it was upsetting Trumpers for some reason. I'm not sure why. Republican presidents give us tax cuts for the wealthy and wars. Democratic presidents give us Medicare, ACA, and Social Security. That's all correct. I mean, I'm not saying anything, and they got blah, 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 whatever. I think it's effective for Democrats to talk about the programs that we've created for people that we now take for granted that have helped so many people. And the GOP has given tax cuts for the wealthy. Donald Trump, George W. Bush did it. What was the W in George W. Bush?
Walker.
It was Walker, too.
Yeah.
Or
I believe so.
That makes sense. I'm not even sure. I never came up.
Maybe I'm wrong.
But what about Democrats making the argument that, hey, war is something the GOP has given you, or at least making the case over and over that we have to be the party of a bold vision, and that we are the party that gave you Medicare, which is so popular, and the ACA and Social Security.
It doesn't even have to be bold vision. It's a specific vision, meaning Democrats always do well when they talk about real policies that people now have because of what Democrats did. So you just did a list. And I think if you framed it, well, Democrats are the party that gives you big government, you might see the poll numbers go down. But if you say Democrats are the people who make sure when you're 65 you have health care and a pension, that polls well all the time. This is a decade-old trend, a multi-decade trend. And that's what Democrats have to talk about. That's what happened with repeal and replace. Trump came in, was full of bluster. But in the end, when people really thought, I'm going to lose this benefit, I'm going to lose my Medicaid coverage, that doesn't play well even in red states.
No, things that touch your real life personally are going to have the biggest impact. I don't know how this is going to play out. I just have a feeling for some reason that Trump's character and fitness to be commander in chief is going to be a bigger issue now because of what we went through collectively, because it invoked a lot of fear in a lot of people, and people have loved ones there. People who were kids might have to get drafted because Iraq was a war with a country about 30 million in 2003. This is a country of over 80 million. And people online were talking about draft and everything like that. And it's plausible you could have a draft. I wonder if this has some lasting impact on Donald Trump. And we'll see. I mean, the polls will answer that pretty soon. And if the economy were to hit any kind of stumble, I just see Trump's base just so much of it going down to that very little teeny core. We have a jobs report coming out Friday for December, and we'll see how that is. Again, I never root for a recession, but all right, so let's take a break. I want to come back and talk about the imperial presidency that you and Kevin wrote about a year ago. Tomorrow it was published, and it's so on point to what the conversation we're having right now. So we'll talk about what does the imperial presidency mean? It's a famous term. I think Arthur Schlesinger sort of coined it. What it means and why it's relevant to Donald Trump right after this break. At this point, the question is not who connected to Donald Trump as a criminal. The question is anyone connected to Donald Trump who's not a criminal?
The Dean Obeidallah Show, Sirius XM Progress. This is the Dean Obeidallah Show, exclusively on Sirius XM's Progress.
And welcome back, Dean Obeidallah Show. We're here a day away from the edge of war. I thought today was going to be such a different show last night. This time, last night, we were here with Danny Savalas on, watching missiles literally in the sky flying, and crazy reports. Maybe American soldiers killed, maybe not, maybe 12, maybe 20 missiles. And Trump going to make a speech to the nation, and it was not going to be one we knew where it was about, like, I'm going to talk about peace now. And here we are. I feel so much more relaxed, but now I can focus a little bit on how we got here. And your article you wrote last year with Kevin Cruz, he's also a professor, he's a historian.
Yeah, at Princeton.
Good guy. He came on once together because you both wrote that great book together. So you wrote about the imperial presidency. Explain to us what that term means.
The idea came 1973. Historian Arthur Schlesinger Jr., a liberal Democrat who had worked with Kennedy, wrote about Franklin Roosevelt. He writes this big book saying we have an imperial presidency. It's a presidency that's not restrained. It's not accountable. It's become much stronger than even the founders ever imagined. And in part because during the 20th century, it gained new powers. It got the power of the national security state. It got the power over huge civil service and bureaucracy. And it's been a critical term, saying that if we have an imperial presidency, we have a democracy where one branch is stronger than Congress and even stronger than the courts, and ultimately we need to fix that. And people today say, even after Richard Nixon, we didn't learn the lessons, we didn't reform the presidency, and we still have something that's quite imperial.
Now, how is it, just objectively speaking, not to anger anyone,
Yep.
how is it when you compare Obama to Trump in terms of the idea of imperial presidency? Was Obama on some level an imperial president?
Sure. I think every president in the modern era falls in this category, and Obama, Clinton, George W. Bush, they all work within that realm. They exercised power aggressively. On domestic issues, often Obama used executive power. He didn't get legislation. He used existing programs and expanded it. That's a form of imperial presidential power. Liberals like that.
Right.
But it's the same
Like DACA,
kind of principle.
right.
The difference is Obama certainly was more committed to traditional governing with this power. Here we have someone who's pretty unhinged and who doesn't follow convention with that power. And I think that's what makes it a little bit different. We don't know day to day what's going to happen. That was never the feeling with Obama.
Maybe Iran will take out Twitter. That would just undermine Donald Trump's power so much. So when you look at Donald Trump, if you're looking at this definition of imperial presidency, is he the greatest, I don't know if term violator, or the person who has been the biggest imperial president we've had?
He is and he isn't. In some ways he is. Certainly the way he uses the bully pulpit, and he'll say whatever he wants about different parts of American society. As we saw with the missile strike, he's pretty aggressive. But in other ways, I think he's not quite competent enough to use the power he has. So, he's done a lot of things on the environment, for example, rolling back regulations. But there's still limits. A lot of the programs Obama put into place, they're still in place. A lot of the New Deal, Great Society programs that were still there are still there, and the courts have tried to check him. So I think there are limits even to President Trump as he tries to move around this way.
I don't even want to contemplate, if he were to get reelected, what he would do with the courts and how much he can, unless somehow, if Trump got reelected but we took the Senate, then no judge gets confirmed for 4 years. They better not confirm, and at least only confirm people who are actually qualified judges. Let's put it that way.
Well, that's a key thing. I always talk about this. Yes, the president is more imperial, but they're often imperial because their party allows them to be. It's a choice by their party. It's about partisanship. And that's certainly the story of the Trump presidency. It's not simply he does whatever he wants. It's that the Republicans in Congress let him do whatever he wants. If they wanted to check him, Senator McConnell could check him on many things, starting right now, including on war power. So it's more about, why do Republicans allow this kind of presidency? Why do they feel their own political interests are served by him doing everything he does? That's the heart of it.
Do you think there's going to be, at some point, there'll be a Democratic president? I'm hoping in a year and about 2 weeks from now, we'll be swearing one in. But so let's assume that happens. Does the argument, but you did this when Trump was there, is that going to matter at all to them? When we call them out on their hypocrisy and their double standards, when a Democratic president does something and you go, you're calling that out? Look what Trump did.
The only way it happens is if Trump becomes the new Watergate, meaning after Watergate, there was a sense the system was really broken after Watergate in Vietnam. And in the 70s, there are efforts to reform this imbalance. That's what the War Powers Act was. We reformed the way we do the budget in a way to try to make Congress more powerful. We created an independent prosecutor that lasted for many decades. It was a reform to restrain presidential power. So the question is Trump so frightening across the political spectrum that it leads to this genuine effort after he's gone to do something about everything he's exposed, about how far you can take this when you want? I don't know if that's going to happen, but you would need that, not just the party shifting power.
You had some of the Democratic 2020 candidates say they would agree to some reforms. I recall some article in Politico several months ago about this. I think there'll be a debate next week, Democratic debate, and I say that because Tom Perez said today if there's impeachment trial, they would bump the debate. But it doesn't look like a trial is going to start by next week. I'm hoping, since it's in the midst of this, that there's a question put to each of the candidates. Would you agree to sign into legislation reforms to restrain the power of the president and have them on record to see what they say? Because it can't be like we're just going to trust you. We can't do that. Either we're going to be a republic, we're going to have checks and balances, or we're going to have a junior king as president. And I don't want the junior king, even if he's a king on my side. I just don't want that.
Look, if we finish with the Trump presidency in 220 or 224, whatever it is, and everything we have seen just happens and no one really does anything about it, we just kind of move on. That's a collective mistake of the democracy. Even I think some supporters of Trump, tepid supporters, see some of the things he is doing that probably aren't good for the system, even if they love him. But certainly there's many people outside of his base who see that clearly. And if we don't do anything, blame the country at that point. Don't blame Trump.
Or blame the filibuster rule in the Senate, because that's part of it. And speaking of the Senate, so now Mitch McConnell announced he has the votes to pass rules for an impeachment trial. But Speaker Pelosi is not given the articles. And at least McConnell's being normal about this, going, if you don't give us the articles, we're not going to have a trial. You have other guys like Lindsey Graham, we're just going to start a trial, which makes no sense. You talked about in the show, the House managers are the prosecutors. So you're not going to have, we'll start the trial. Who's going to prosecute? Are you going to pick your own prosecutors, make it just the ultimate rigged trial? So McConnell's like, don't give us the articles, no trial. Give us the articles, here's my rules. We're following the Clinton rules. But if they do the Clinton rules, which are now effectively there's opening statements, and then they can vote on are going to allow witnesses or documents to be subpoenaed or not. I think the Democrats, honestly should take that if they want to do a trial. Take that and use the entire opening to make the case, or here are the key witnesses we need. Here is what we think they're going to say. And the person stopping us from hearing from them is the defendant on trial here today. And they could do whatever they want in the Senate. McConnell and Republicans go like, we're done. But at least it makes the point over and over, and the media will pick up a theme that they're key people. John Bolton, one of the biggest ones. John Eisenberg, National Security Council lawyer, who everyone ran to and said, hey, there's something going on here. Others. I know this is just more politics in a way. You're playing it, but can't the Democrats use the opening statement part for that, even if they're going to lose this trial? So why not make the most of it politically? There will be a point that the speaker needs to do that. And she's savvy enough to understand, I think, that is how the game ends. And it's not a game, it's a constitutional process. I think she is waiting now just to see how many more drips and drabs of revelations can come out of the media so that it's very clear when Republicans take the vote that they are going to take, everyone in the country knows exactly what they're doing. I think that's what she's trying to do. But then there will be a point that they do exactly what you say. They will send it. They will have the trial. They will confirm again what has happened, what the Senate isn't doing. There'll be a vote. He will remain in office. But you have to let that process play out. I don't think it's smart if she indefinitely holds on to the articles. I mean, it's a hard question, but when is the time that you think she has to give it up? The deeper we get in the election season. I mean, there is no time. She can hold it, but I think the longer the public shifts attention from this, and they will because of the election, then the more it's forgotten, and it almost seems less important just because she's holding on to them. Interestingly, the edge of potential war certainly made me forget impeachment for a few days. It's like I didn't even care. I don't even care about the articles. I care about people dying at this point. So withholding it now through this time, now we're going back to where we were pre the potential war. I don't know what it'll take more. As I mentioned to you, Congresswoman Bonnie Watson-Coleman was on earlier. She's very friendly with the speaker and said she's holding on to these, holding them close to her chest until she gets the commitment she wants. And will not tell me if there's a deadline or not. Yeah. So I don't know what the commitments are either. Fair trial. No, I know, but she knows she's not going to get that. So I'm not sure she is one of the savviest people in Washington, and she knows McConnell will not bend beyond maybe a couple, videotape depositions. she has pissed him off. I mean, you could just tell. He's like, who do you think you are? You
Right.
run this thing. Like, he is very upset with this institutional insult going on. Now, some Democratic senators said today, Dianne Feinstein and a few others, not saying, what are you doing, Pelosi, but saying publicly, we're ready to do the trial.
Yeah.
That seems to be the thing that's going to push her more, I would think, than anything else.
Well, sure. The more that Senate Democrats are saying that out loud in public, the more pressure she's going to be. Because obviously she needs the support of her caucus, but she needs the full support of the Senate Democrats. The last thing she wants is to somehow send this over and have big defections from Senate Democrats. That would look terrible. So she needs to keep them as united as possible. And I don't know if she counts on Schumer to do that or not, who's the Senate minority leader. But I think that is a pressure point.
All right, let's take a break and come back and talk about the 2020 race, which has been, you almost feel for the mid-level candidates and the lower-level ones. We had impeachment suck up all the oxygen. We had potential war take it for the last week now. And we have a debate next week, which no one is talking about. And we have a primary coming up February 3rd and February 11th is New Hampshire. We're going to be by the way, we'll be in New Hampshire live. Myself, Michelangelo Signorelli, I think the morning show as well, the day before and the day of the primary. So looking forward to being there. And we'll give you more details because we're going to be broadcasting from this diner that they rent out. It's like an annual, every 4-year tradition they do. And so if you live in New Hampshire, I hope you'll come out and visit us in the diner. But let's take a break and come back and talk about the 2020 race, the news polls that's going on, and how much Iowa, New Hampshire, historically, from your point of view as an historian, can have a difference, not just for the winners, but for those who exceed expectations, how this could change the game for them and could mark the end for others. Let's take a break and be right back.
Dean Obadala Show on Sirius XM Progress 127. His show, your voice. 866-99-SIRIUS. 866-997-4748. Let's make a difference together. This is the Dean Obadala Show
on Sirius XM Progress 127.
And welcome back, Dean Obadala Show. We're live here Wednesday, January 8th in studio with Julian Zelizer, CNN contributor, professor at Princeton, historian. And, I get emails from people going, why don't you have on like Cory Booker or candidates? And we've had a lot on. Cory Booker, we've tried to get on. Joe Biden, I'm trying all the time to try to get him on the show. I would like everyone to hear directly on the show from the candidates. We've been lucky, though, as a show and as a channel, we've had on almost everybody. I think no one's had on Biden, but we had Warren on. We've had Bernie on a bunch of times. Everyone's had Bernie on and Steyer and a few others. But you look at the poll numbers now, and I've got to tell you, and this is an intangible, But the energy I felt in the summer for the field has dissipated. I don't know why, and I have grave concerns about that. The energy to defeat Donald Trump is not gone. That's as strong as ever. That's a good thing. The energy around the field of candidates, and I had Jamira Burley on Monday, who's a millennial and active in politics, who I asked her, do you feel like the energy is the same? She said no, and she had her reasons why. I know it's an intangible. What is your sense about that?
No, I have a sense, but it could just be a perception. I mean,
everything's perception.
They're raising huge amounts of money, a lot of these candidates. A lot of them are still polling well, meaning it isn't now just Biden. They're all still holding their support, which does suggest some of that enthusiasm really is there. And it's quite strong, and it might just feel because you're not focused on it all the time, right, or because people are focused on other issues or their lives, that you don't have that attachment, and it will come back once the race starts. Meaning once it's competitive.
Somebody wins.
Yeah.
You're right. Just normally the horse race stuff excites everyone. So you get to who won Iowa? Oh, wow. And then the next week is New Hampshire. And then the week after that's Nevada and then South Carolina. And it builds to March 3rd, which is Super Tuesday. Yeah. And that night will be huge because it'll be all night. It'll be like a presidential election night. All night, different states are coming in. And California's in play. I mean, that's you don't have a home person. I don't know if Senator Harris was going to win it anyway, but without her there, it's clearly an open field. So even late at night, we'll be 12, 1 o'clock in the morning, New York time, 2 a.m., we're going to be getting results in. So that'll be a big night. So when you look at the poll numbers right now, you've got the Real Clear Politics average, and I keep using that average to keep a standard method of the metric here. Biden at 29%. Really hasn't moved. That's the average as of today, folks. Next, Bernie Sanders at 20%. That might sound like, well, he's been around there. He had slid. He's back up to 20%. Who has slid is Warren, who's now down to 15% in the average. Mayor Pete, and this is nationally, 8%. Bloomberg at 6%, who's stolen some of Tom Steyer's, some of, I think, Mayor Pete's thunder there. But should we even be looking at the national poll now? Should we only be focused on Iowa and New Hampshire polling right now?
No, I think this Super Tuesday is going to matter a lot. And when you have a field this competitive where there's going to be some surprises in those first two, what you're really trying to figure out is when mass voting takes place in big states, is there a candidate who has a pretty clear path to victory? So does Biden, after you get away from the excitement of Iowa maybe, or what happens in New Hampshire, does he have a pretty clear field to winning? That does actually matter, and national polls will give you some sense of that. The other question is, does Iowa change the polling? So does a victory in Iowa or a good performance, second place performance, change how people are thinking when the next rounds take place? And that has happened in the past. That happened with Obama. That happened with Jimmy Carter. And it could be that's the case this time.
And in Iowa, according to the averages of today, and this is a neck-and-neck race in Iowa right now, folks. Bernie Sanders at 22%, Pete Buttigieg at 22%, Joe Biden at 20%. That's all margin of error. So you have a top tier. Warren nipping at their heels at 15%. And again, this is average. You can find different polls that say different things. And Klobuchar at 7%. So she has a potential to overperform. But when's the last time? Can you remember historically when you had 4 candidates that are the top tier like this?
Not this competitive. You can think, well, certainly even the Republican primaries and caucuses in 2016 were a bit like this. But these are not just a bunch of strong candidates. They're very strong candidates with strong organization, lots of money. They can go for a long time given how much they've raised. And we have not had this kind of situation in a while.
And that's a great point. The money is so important. It's so horrible that we have to talk about money. And I say that sincerely. I hate the idea that candidates have to raise money. I wish it was purely publicly financed and people could run without having to be a billionaire or a millionaire to run. But the money they're raising now, they're not just all spending on Iowa or New Hampshire. Because this is so competitive, don't they have to spend money on Nevada, which is right afterwards, of course, South Carolina? But they have to look at March 3rd and Super Tuesday. It's across the nation. From California to Virginia's in play. There's so many states. I'll have the list another night, but Virginia's the 3rd most delegate. So Virginia's really important. California's got the most. That's obviously across the nation and even more important. So you need almost a national campaign budget to deal with Super Tuesday.
It is a national campaign. On the one hand, you're doing these local, old-fashioned retail politics in Iowa and New Hampshire. But on the other hand, if you're going to be competitive with this many formidable candidates, you're running the ads, you have a campaign going in all of these big Super Tuesday states, and you're basically doing two tasks at once. And part of the piece to that puzzle is a lot of money. It's not good. People want it reformed, but right now that's the name of the game. And the story is a lot of them have that money. Mayor Pete, Bernie Sanders, Warren, they have the money to play in Super Tuesday. And so that's why this is going to go for a while. It's going to maybe go all the way to the convention.
Is this concerning at all? The CBS poll Sunday came out, Iowa, New Hampshire voters, just poll of just Democrats. It asks about enthusiasm for your candidate. For people who supported Bernie, 67% are enthusiastic. The next highest, Liz Warren, 61%. Whereas Joe Biden, only 49% say they're enthusiastic. And also, of people who were supporting Bernie, that they were the highest percentage of people who are absolutely committed to their candidate. Biden, way, way down there. People still have an open mind. They might switch. Is this, if you're a Biden, Team Biden, should you be concerned?
Maybe. Look, I was one early on who was skeptical Biden could do well, but he is doing well. I'll be the first to admit it. And maybe we're in a moment where lack of enthusiasm for a candidate isn't debilitating. And maybe the sentiment about the incumbent is so strong that people aren't looking to be excited. They're not looking to be inspired. They're just looking for someone who can win. And it might be if there is someone who looks like they can win, that is enough to bring out the vote. I don't know if that's true. Part of me is skeptical that, you're going to need to bring out the vote because Trump will. He will bring out the vote in these states like Wisconsin. And a Democrat needs to match that. But maybe there's something to the low-key candidate for the Democrats being the person they want right now.
I've got to say, when you look at things objectively right now, ascending right now, moving up, and with some momentum, is Bernie Sanders, and then Joe Biden in that he got his footing, and then in New Hampshire, like they were thought he was going to do pretty good on Iowa. He's tied for the top tier. In New Hampshire, he was down. Brand new CBS poll Sunday, Sanders at 27%, Biden at 25%, and Warren from the neighboring state down to 18%. So Joe Biden could win Iowa, then win New Hampshire, and is going to win South Carolina.
Yep.
I mean, that would be the only game changer. That's a different path where perhaps it breaks off the top tier and you're down to a fight between just a few left. It's not like he can win it outright that quickly, but that would be a stunning. That's the only thing I think changed this trajectory from something that's going to go on for a long, long time.
That would be crushing for Sanders and Warren and Buttigieg. If Biden just clears it right away, I think you're exactly right. Even with money, even with enthusiasm, that would all rebound to Biden's benefit. I'm not sure that's going to happen. I mean, what Sanders has that none of the other candidates has is a following, like a movement behind him. He really does have that passionate, loyal, devout followers who won't vote for anyone right now other than him. And that's a big thing to have in American politics. And I think that's what he's capitalizing on. It's going to matter in these two early contests.
If you had this is pure speculation. I'm not going to ask you who's going to win, not that. But if you look at the other tier, Klobuchar, Yang, Gabbard, Steyer, Booker, Bloomberg, anyone you think will overperform? We're going to talk again, I think, before Iowa because that's almost a month away. But anyone when you're looking at them objectively, you said, maybe that's the one that's going to overperform and get some press.
Klobuchar. I mean, she's already done that. She's always been a good candidate. She's a serious politician who wins votes. She wins purple state votes. She knows what she's doing in front of the cameras. She knows how to campaign. And I think she's the one who could easily, I think she's underperformed. She's a mystery to me. Maybe it was that early New York Times article about her getting mad, which somehow devastated her campaign, which it's hard to really grasp that. But I think she's the one to look at. Not that she's going to win, but I can easily imagine her coming in much stronger than people thought.
Were you surprised that Julian Castro endorsed Liz Warren so quickly after he dropped
a little
out?
bit. I mean, I don't know enough about the internals of why he did that and what exactly he was thinking or what might have been offered. But look, Warren's also a very attractive candidate for many Democrats in terms of the policy issues. So she matches up what Castro was for as well.
I objectively, do you think Warren Castro could be a ticket?
It could be a ticket, yeah. I think that the Democrats might say, though, they want someone who's more stable, centrist, mainstream Democrat than even a Castro.
Really?
If Warren somehow is I just think that's how Democrats are. It's a safety election. They want to do whatever is safe so he doesn't win again. That's the main goal. And so I think that's hard for Castro. He's a little less known, too. That's bad.
He's such an impressive guy.
Very
I
impressive.
interviewed him so much, various times and in person as well. And,
He has a big future.
And great on policy, and it should be your importance on. Now, Liz Warren's great on policy too. Bernie, but I mean, everyone's got policy. Liz Warren probably the best in details. But Castro was talking about policies no one was talking about: policing reform, poverty programs. Really made it a big issue. It should have moved people. I can't say why it doesn't. That's life. There's a reason we can say it, from not knowing his name well enough to racism, whatever you want to say. But the reality is, he is out. He's supporting Liz Warren. But let's take a break and come back with our friend Julian Zelizer right after this.
Dean Obadala Show on Sirius XM Progress 127.
Back to the Dean Obadala Show on Sirius XM Progress.
And welcome back, Dean Obadala Show. We're here with Julian Zelizer. And look who just walked in. How did you get him? John Fugelsang is here.
Dean, I'd like to see some identification.
As always, I have my papers here for you. John, last night, I was turning over the show, and I said, there are rockets in the air, and Trump might give his speech, and a night later, it's like
and I said, maybe it's a lot of mediocre male prick waving. Maybe that's all this is.
And that's what it was?
Mm-hmm. That's all it was, because the people of Iran don't want a war. The people of America don't want a war. The majority, you know this better than me, you're a smart person. The majority of Iran's population is under the age of 50. The Ayatollahs are going to age out. You cannot have this conservative religious men controlling that country and forever. Maybe here, but not
come
there.
to America, right?
Yeah,
and
times they are
like
changing.
Mike Pence and Pompeo. How much, you talk a lot about religion, how much of Christian supremacy do you think plays a role with Pompeo and
It's
Pence?
not Christian supremacy. It's evangelical supremacy.
Oh,
they
that's
have
really...
rejected the teachings of Jesus. We have to just remember this. Even if you're an atheist, you can know they have rejected everything Jesus talked about. That's why they talk about abortion, which the Bible does not prohibit. Abortion is how you get followers of Jesus to vote against everything Jesus talked about by talking about something Jesus never talked about. And it works.
They've never read Matthew. You know, that
Never
was
read
hungry and thirsty and all that.
Matthew 25.
So Julian, thank you very much, my friend, for being here. By the way, John, who's on your show tonight?
The great Bob Seska joins us this evening of
Bob.
Salon.com, and we're thrilled to have him to break apart all of this, and then some great comedians in the third hour, as always.
Excellent. So don't go anywhere. Julian Zelizer, thank you very much.
Thank
Follow
you.
him on
I just come
Twitter
here to hang out with your
Julian
guests.
Zelizer.
At Julian Zelizer, or see him on CNN, where he decides settlements of lawsuits, according to the call that we had earlier in the show tonight. Thanks for tuning in. I'm on Twitter at Dean Obidala. So drop me an email, dean@deanofradio.com. That's DEAN @deanofradio.com. Don't go anywhere. Tell me everything with John Fugelsang coming up right after this quick break.